Oh, of course, the sound is turned off. Lovely way to start the day. Let me... Sorry about that. Guys, my apologies. Welcome back. Thank you for tuning in. Someone has noticed an issue between video and audio, that there might be a lag between the two. So let me know if you notice that in my streams and the videos that I clip from these streams. But it's good to be back on this lovely Tuesday. Apologies about the 10-minute delay, but I just wanted to grab some food and water beforehand so that I could be on with you guys for a little over 2 hours. We're going to have a little bit of a longer show today, and we are going to be discussing a variety of topics here. We're going to be talking about the best developmental teams in America, teams that will claim to be NFLU, the best developers in the sport. We'll finish up our Breakout player series for now. I think we might redo that right before the season hits us in, say, July or August, but for now it's going to conclude. And then some interesting topics involving Georgia, great on Kirby Smart, Nebraska, and why I think this is Nebraska's most critical season of the 2020s, Michigan, Miami, Indiana recruiting. We'll discuss some topics from Friday's show that I just didn't get to because I was really tired. But thank you all for coming on. Make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, make sure to hit that notification bell, be active in the live chat. Super chats are appreciated. Signing up for the Patreon page is appreciated because those things, well, they allow me to operate this channel at high efficiency. They allow me to produce daily content. And, yeah, it's just wonderful stuff. So thank you for making the dream come true. John McLean says there is a YouTube lag. Oh, I think I know what you're talking about. Let me see. There is a YouTube delay. I will have to look into that then. I'll have to look into that. Okay. So there might be a difference between the audio and video alignment. So that means I look like I'm about to say something and it actually, like, it's a millisecond or up to a second or something off. I'll look into that because I imagine that could be pretty disturbing for some viewers. I tried to look into it before the stream began, but I just didn't have the time to. But again, like, comment, do those things. We are first and foremost going to discuss teams who will claim that they are the best at developing NFL product, and who those teams will be, I think, over the next 2 years. Because right now, I think it's pretty clear. Based on recent history, it's Ohio State or it's Georgia. And not many other teams really have a debate outside of those two, in my opinion. But when you look at the next 2 years and project and have some fun, there might be some differences in that department. These 7 teams are going to send the most players off to the NFL in the next 2 years. They will be the best developers of talent, and they will identify talent before you, I, or 95% of other college football staffs do. And consequentially, 2 years down the road, these schools will get to tell recruits in their living rooms and their parents, or when recruits come over and watch games at their stadium or take a look at their facilities, they'll get to put their arm around their shoulder and look at them and say, hey, you can come here, you can win, you can work hard, be developed, and we will send you off to the NFL guaranteed. So, who are those schools? I think the first one you have to look at is Ohio State. Ohio State had 4 first-round picks last year, all of them inside of the top 11. That is a first since Michigan State in the 1960s. 11 total players were selected in the 2026 draft. That was the most of any team. They have had the most selections of any team in the NFL draft for 2 years in a row now. That directly rivals Georgia's selections in the 2022 in 2023 NFL drafts, and I view Ohio State's run from 2024 to this season, or 2023 to this season, depending on how you view that 2023 team, is like the current apex of the Ryan Day era, in the same way I view Georgia's run from 2021 to 2023 as the apex of the Kirby Smart era at Georgia. Carnell Tate, Arvell Reese, Caleb Downs, Sonny Styles, those are the top 4 picks. Cade McDonald got picked early second round, and he was viewed as a day one guy, but I guess the rest of the league wasn't as high on him as mock drafters and analysts were. Still a very good player. You also had Lorenzo Styles Jr., Caden Curry, Will Kazmarek, Max Clare, a lot of other Ohio State players, Davis Igbinosun drafted. They do a great job. They recruit at a high level, they scout at a high level, they develop at a high level. They're the best program in college football history, and right now, if I'm just looking at a 2 to 3 year window of excellence, I would put Ohio State as the number 1 program in college football. Ryan Day has close to a 90% win percentage. He's won a national title. I think he is a better coach than Urban Meyer, and it may not be close. And he's taken what he inherited, and he has helped future-proof it and continued and maximized Ohio State's capabilities to developing young men to enter the professional league and have success there. He's the first Ohio State coach in the modern era to field, and by modern era I mean 21st century, to field a quarterback with NFL success in C.J. Stroud, who was also picked in the first round. We have up next Georgia, who I would say, along with Ohio State right now, these are the 2 current schools who could be considered NFLU at this current moment. I would have given it... I messed something up there, didn't I? What is it with me and messing things up recently? I don't quite know what it is. Georgia is the other school that could proclaim themselves as NFLU right now. I side with Ohio State because of them getting 4 first-round picks in the top 11 and being the only school outside of, I believe, Alabama and Texas A&M to get double-digit draft picks. So Georgia had a bit of an NFL draft fall-off in this past draft. However, when you look at before that and some of the projections for next season's draft, I think that you got to look at Georgia and see that with how they recruit and how they've been able to develop specifically on the lines of scrimmage, consistently getting first-round picks on the offensive line almost every year. They got Christian Miller drafted, who, according to some, was a first-round defensive tackle, much like Caden McDonald. Didn't pan out that way. They've done a good job developing at linebacker, tight end. They got Zachariah Branch drafted on day 2 at receiver. So they've actually had some sneaky, underrated wide receiver production at Georgia. They haven't been the Georgia Bulldogs of 2021 through 2023, but maybe this coming college football season they could be. In 2 years down the road, they could produce stronger NFL draft classes than they did this past season. People also forget that 2025 NFL draft class for Georgia was pretty damn good. I think they had 13 selections, only trailed Ohio State by 1 that year. That team just has a litany. They had a litany of issues there. So mostly injuries, I think some coaching things, the schedule didn't help. So I think Georgia will continue to have success in the professional league from a player development standpoint. And when you look at their trend over 5 years, you do notice a regression in 2024 and 2025, but perhaps that's like a regression to the mean, I guess you could say. They still recruit at a high level, they still win at a high level. It's just not quite as extreme as it was in that 3-year window that Georgia had. Oregon, I think, will have a claim over the next 2 years. Why? Well, they got 2 first-rounders drafted this past season. They had Josh Connerly Jr. and Derek Harmon drafted in 2025. So they've had 2 years in a row with 2 first-round picks. They had 7 total players drafted, and that was with most of their team electing to return this season to potentially win a national championship. Dan Lanning has done an excellent job scouting, an excellent job of recruiting, of developing. I think that Dan Lanning is one of the best in the business right now. And sure, you can criticize the game management a bit, the game plans for rematches against Ohio State and Indiana, but he's won big games. He's won the Big Ten. He's won playoff games. And Sadiq, getting him drafted in the first round, reviving Dylan Thieneman's career, Emmanuel Pregnan, getting him picked on day 2. He was projected a day 1 pick. I don't know why he fell that far, but still should have success in the league. Kennedy was an underrated get out of the portal last year, and he goes early day 3. And Bryce Betcher, I believe, went in the 5th round, 6th round. Oregon had a really fantastic season last year. I think they did as good of a job as almost anyone rebuilding, where after 2024 they lost much of their production, and in 2025 they got better. And look at the trend of this program. You're talking about 10 wins, 10-3 Lanning's first year, then 12-2, 13-1, 13-2. And they have been efficient, and they have been productive, and they've recruited at a high level and developed at a high level. It's been absolutely fantastic what I've seen out of Oregon from a development standpoint, from a recruiting standpoint. I don't know what else to say there, really. I think that they have recruited at the level of Ohio State, Georgia, and Alabama of old from a quality angle for 2 years in a row, and I have faith in their scouting department and developing department. So that's going to translate to on-field success, and that's going to translate to a lot of first-round picks in these next 2 or 3 seasons. Indiana, I think, will be up here. Now, will they get the volume drafted or the quality drafted of some of these other top schools? I don't know. Recruiting odds and how recruiting does translate to NFL success would imply that no, they probably don't. But they had 2 first-round picks last year, including their first overall pick in the 21st century. They had 8 players selected in the 2026 draft, which was a program record. And with Indiana, what people have to consider is how good this staff is at developing and scouting, where I look at Fernando Mendoza, and he was getting first-round draft hype out of Cal. So, yeah, it's not like Indiana made him a made man, but they improved him and built a good system around him and helped maximize his talents. Omar Cooper Jr., Indiana recruited him under Tom Allen. He played there. He did well in 2024 and had a breakout campaign in 2025, where he was their best receiver for much of the year until Charlie Becker came on the scenes in really the Ohio State game, the college football playoff, a little bit before in Penn State, but against Ohio State, Oregon, Alabama, Miami, you begin to know, okay, yeah, he's different. Cooper was a first-round draft pick. Pons would have been if he wasn't 5'9", and I know that's something inherent in, who he is. Like, he just is that short. But with a player like him, I don't know how much it is going to matter. He was probably the second best corner or best corner in college football last year. Leonard Moore, I would probably put as the best, definitely from a talent angle, but Pons' impact was understated by his numbers, even though he had interceptions, pass breakups, even though he had forced fumbles. He was just an overall impactful player. And just those examples are evidence, I believe, of this staff's scouting capability, developmental capabilities, and they're only going to get more talented. You look at Indiana's trajectory right now. You look at their current recruiting class, actually. Indiana historically has been a program that recruits at the top 40 or 50. Right now it's early, and they have a recruiting class that is around the 40s. Last year they signed one that was 30th. Those recruiting class numbers are only going to go up steadily but surely. And that means they're going to have a higher likelihood in the future to field teams with more, if not significantly more, NFL talent than last year's team did. That's a scary thought. So I'm not telling you that Indiana's going to go 32-0 over the next 2 years. What I'm telling you is that over the next 2 years, these teams are going to get more talented, and you're probably going to see them replicate that type of success where they're setting program records for number of players drafted, and they're not just producing day 2 or day 3 guys, but they're producing some day 1 talents as well. Texas, they for a while there held that top spot when you looked at the 2024 and 2025 NFL draft, where I think they got 13 players drafted in each, and eventually you saw the consequences of that success last year, where they had 2 seasons in a row where they lost 26, I think, NFL draft picks. And you saw some flaws in that team where Texas just isn't really, I don't know if any program is. I don't know if any program could have 0 down years if they had 13 picks plucked from them year over year over year. Like that's hard to do. And Texas still went 10-3, and that was a down year, which just shows the state of that program. They didn't get any first-rounders for the first time since 2022, but in the 2022 draft, they had no one picked. So Texas has come a long way to where their down year for producing NFL picks is now 6 selections instead of 0. It's a testament to what Sark has done there in terms of development, culture, recruiting. I think the only problem with Texas right now is just taking that next step in big games and translating their NFL talent to on-field success at the highest level. But there's no doubt that this program, they have success in producing great players, I would say. They had the number 1 recruiting class in 2024. They took a smaller class in 2025 whose quality was weighed down by a lot of special teams additions, and also trying to get, I think, some players that they just barely missed on. They recruited a high level. They develop at a high level. The concerns are just with, I would say, game management, out-coaching Kirby Smart or Ryan Day or those types of athletes. But Sark's had a successful tenure at Texas so far, and I cannot wait to see where that all goes. But I think in 2 years, this will be talked about as one of the schools to go to get developed for the pro leagues. We have, why did I do that? So I'm gonna need to make a note there. Sorry about these errors, guys. Miami is up next. I think we have to discuss Miami in this conversation. The Miami Hurricanes produced 3 first-round picks for this draft. Last draft, they had round 1, pick 1 in Cameron Ward. What does that mean? That means Miami has 4 first-round picks over the past 2 drafts. That is not quite Ohio State level, where they've had 8. But then again, is Ohio State going to have 8 every 2-year window? Most definitely not, I would say. Miami, can they sustain 2 every year? We'll see. That's even hard to do. But what they were able to do last year, and the reason they went on that playoff run, is because of the lines of scrimmage they had. And you saw that in the draft, where Mai Noah was a first-round tackle, Ruben Bain Jr. and Akeem Mesidor were the only duo of DNs to get picked in the first round this season. That was the best DN duo in America by quite a bit last year. And Mai Noah was probably college football's I would say tackle one last year. They had the best O-line and D-line combo in the country. And it was a big reason, on top of the fact that, like, Markel Bell was a third-round pick, but early third-round pick. Their tackles and ends and, like, outside trenches, and their interior trenches were strong too, but not as strong. That was a big reason why they were able to mask some of the issues they had at other positions. Cristobal hasn't necessarily recruited at like the Oregon, Ohio State, Texas type level. You see that where most of his classes are inside the top 10. Occasionally you get one outside of the top 10. But they're kind of hovering around there. But I think they want a certain type of player to fit that mold. They scout as well as anyone, and they play at a high level. They develop at a high level. They're strong. They're physical. They have a certain philosophy about how they want to build their team. I mean, think about Malachi Toney. 3-star out of high school and was probably the best true freshman wide receiver in college football last year. Not possibly, but definitely at the end of the season. You look at Akeem Mesidor, played at West Virginia, transferred to Miami, took a while to get there, but eventually got to be a first-round talent. And look, it's only been 1 year of them having this high level of success, but they've also been building to this point. And finally, I think we got to talk about one more school, that being Texas Tech. So with Texas Tech, this one's probably the boldest on the list because I'm not putting Michigan up here, not quite putting Notre Dame up here. I think they've done a pretty good job at corner with Leonard Moore and the two backs, and they do have C.J. Carr. It's just very, very stacked. And Texas Tech scouting, I mean, David Bailey was their highest NFL draft pick since 1964. That's wild. And then they got Romello Height. They got Ben Roberts. He came back, but Jacob Rodriguez, Lee Hunter, Caleb Douglas. They had so many day one and day two, in particular, draft picks, which shows how good that team was last year. They were talented, and in truth, I think in many aspects, they were a QB away last season from making real damage. And it didn't help either that they had to play the third best team in the country in Oregon. Some of those teams that got the bye, say Georgia, did not finish top 5 in efficiency metrics. Like, Georgia would have been a much easier draw for Texas Tech than Oregon would have been, for example. They got stuck with and Texas Tech got the bye. I'm confusing myself here. Texas Tech got a tough draw with Oregon. It was a bad matchup. They were a QB away. And when I look at what they've done in the portal this year and what they have done at other positions where they bring players back with quality production, I think that in the next 2 seasons, what Texas Tech did, getting 9 players selected in the draft, which is a program record for them, is going to be more of the norm rather than a fluke. So those are the 7 teams that I'm looking at to possibly claim to be NFLU over the next 2 seasons. Let me know what you think about this down in the comment section below. Breakout players are up next. I know it's very, very early, but I could use a bit of water right now, so I'm going to take a very brief break, and we will be back. So just a little bit of a break, take a drink of water, I think refresh myself, and we'll see you all very soon. All right, thank you for your patience, everyone. Just had to get that drink of water. It is hot up here, even with the fan on, which helps. But we're going to talk about some breakout players. Now, just taking a look around college football. Want to take a look at Oregon first, then USC. We will discuss other topics after that. So stay tuned. We have a jam-packed show here. I'm going to talk about now one of the deepest defenses in college football entering this season. That would be Oregon's defense. With Oregon, it's interesting. You know, they make the move from Tosh Lupoi to Chris Hampton. I don't know if they downgraded there. Offensive coordinator, I'd probably say, yeah, that move was a bit concerning or confusing. But on the defensive side of the football, I think that they may have upgraded there. And roster-wise, they certainly did. Oregon has the most talented defense in college football and one of the deepest in America. So they should expect to field an elite defense and one that is close to the caliber of Lanning's defenses at Georgia. To get there, they are going to have to see a change in personnel and several players stepping up, not just in starting roles, but in backup roles and even in third string and rotational roles that go deep on the defensive line. So who are some players that could break out? Players that I think will break out. Let me know your breakout candidates for the Oregon Ducks defense down below in the comment section. Firstly, I have Nasir Wyatt coming in first. And this is because as a true freshman, he showed a capability to get to the passer, capability to get to the quarterback in a way that I don't know if Tatum Tuioti and Mateo Uyunglele have. Just at 6'2", 230 pounds, his agility, how fluid he is as a pass rusher, and just some of the natural speed, acceleration, the hands. I don't know if you can teach all of that, or it certainly would be very difficult to teach all of that. He's putting on weight, and last year he got 3 sacks and 7 pressures. And now with probably more growth, both in length, height, especially in terms of strength, and being in that strength and conditioning program for another preseason, he is slated to have a bigger role, especially when you have Ashton Porter leaving the program for Houston, for example, and other backup players like Tione Gray transferring to Notre Dame. So they lost a lot of their D-line depth last year. Wyatt played some in the college football playoff and did pretty well against Indiana, for example. I expect him to have around 5 or 6 sacks this year, definitely get into the double digits in terms of pressures. He might be the best pass rusher on the team, and Oregon is going to have him guaranteed for another year because he's a true sophomore this season. And you pair him with Elijah Rushing, who is slated to be the second stringer on the other side of the defensive end group, and those two with Mateo Uyunglele and Tatum Tuioti probably make up the best group of DNs in college football from the same school. Elijah Rushing had a pressure last year. He's taken a few seasons to really come along. Last year and the year before, didn't see much action. It sounds like the staff is pleased with where he is at right now in his career, and they are expecting him to take a step forward this season and have more production. Tony Tuioti, their defensive line coach, was giving him praise and saying that he's taken another step in his game this preseason. We've also heard that about Aiden Breland, a defensive tackle who was in the same class as Rushing and has taken a few seasons to come along. Last season suffered a injury. This season, with Terrence Green and with Tione Gray transferring out to start at other schools or be in the rotation there, he is going to be a backup on this team. You got him, you got DeAndre Robinson, you have Amari Washington, you have Bear Alexander. Washington was a first-round pick and elected to come back. Bear Alexander probably would have been a day 2 selection. And Breland has all the talent in the world, the proper measurables, height, weight, length. He's been mentioned as someone who's taken a step forward in his game. I wanted to shout out transfer DeAndre Robinson on this defense because, look, he originally went to Florida, played at North Carolina, did quite well there. And now he's transferring to Oregon, which is a much better situation than North Carolina. I was about to just say better there, but I thought that would be disrespectful. He had 9 pressures, 1 forced fumble, half a sack. I mean, at 6'4", 315 pounds, he has the right tools to be a defensive tackle at Oregon with the expectations that they have. And I like him to, again, he's not starting, but be someone who can quietly clean up offenses, clean up the middle of the field when they're rotating guys and say that starting defensive line or starting defensive tackles might need a rest for a series, that he can come in and do his job. We have Devin Jackson at linebacker. I have Devin Jackson as a huge breakout player this year. Yes, he's played a lot for Oregon, but Oregon has had some weaknesses at linebacker before under Tosh Lupoy and Dan Lanning's defenses at Oregon. They've been good there, but they haven't been great. They haven't been elite. I don't know if they're going to be elite this year there, but I think that they have the age they did last year. They're more talented on paper, and I think there's a good chance they upgraded at defensive play caller and defensive coordinator. So I believe the linebacker room, even with Betcher's absence, and he is a hard player to replace, is actually going to get better. That is a, I don't know if it's a bold prediction for Oregon that I have, but it is a prediction I have for Oregon nonetheless, that their linebacker room is going to take a step forward. It's going to reach that next level of twitchiness, of tackling, of hard hitting, and I think Devin Jackson is going to spearhead that. He had 6 pressures last year, 41 total tackles, PFF grade in the 60s. Gavin Nix as a redshirt freshman, I also have as a breakout player. Played sparingly last season as a true freshman. Now with another year in the program, I would expect him to take a step forward and be a contributor in what is I would say, a deeper linebacker room last year. They lost Betcher, but I think they return 3 out of the top 4 linebackers from last year in terms of snaps or production. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but they return a lot on defense, and having that roster continuity, having a staff continuity because their position coaches come back, and Hampton being the co-DC and DB's coach last year, pretty familiar with the system, will do his own things because he is a different person than Lupoy. But I'm excited to see this linebacker group, and if it can be more aggressive, if it can make more impactful plays this season than it has done in past seasons, I would say yes. And someone like Gavin Nix stepping up and Devin Jackson taking that next step as an older player would be reasons why. Naeem Offord at corner played a lot last year, so much that he burned his red shirt. Devin Sanchez is expected to do amazing things at Ohio State, and I do think Devin Sanchez will break out. Naeem Offord was originally in Devin Sanchez's Ohio State recruiting class, flips to Oregon. He played a lot last year. He had some struggles, but also some good moments. I'm expecting him to break out as well and have a really good season. Now, he won't be starting if Obadegwu and Brandon Finney Jr., who was a part of Naeem Offord's class at corner, those are going to be your starters. But I do think you're going to see Offord get mixed in here a bit more, and there is a chance at some point he could start because he's possibly so good of a player that it would be a fool. It could be a foolish thing to leave him off. I'm really excited to see what he can do in an Oregon secondary that is yet again going to be loaded this year. And speaking of Oregon secondary, we have Peyton Woodyard as a breakout player here. An interception. He had a pick 6 last year off that interception. 22 total tackles, PFF grade in the 70s. Transferred in from Alabama has been in the system at Oregon for a few years now. Very talented player, big, tall, long. It's likely going to be Coy Parrish and Aaron Flowers that'll start at safety, but I can see Woodyard making his way into that defense a bit more than he did last year, and he made his way into that defense quite a bit. So when you're returning starters, when you're returning depth, that's a really good place to be at when you're a defense. Carl Williams IV is the final breakout player on this list. Transferred in from Baylor. This looks like a scouting get where Lanning and the Ducks are betting on their own scouting paying off. And the reason I say that is because he played at Baylor. Baylor's not exactly been known for defense these past few seasons. Didn't put up incredible numbers, didn't wow PFF and their scouts. So you're looking at someone who I think Oregon sees. They said, okay, we want you. And they're banking on their own scouting and development. He was injured for most of 2025. I would expect him to rebound with a better situation, supporting cast, and development in 2026. With Oregon's defense, they were strong in so many areas. They had a wonderful pass defense. They had a good, not great, but good run defense. They were towards the top of defenses in opponent points per play, opponent touchdowns per game. They were not the greatest at getting to the quarterback, but they still got there at a respectable level. They did a good job taking away the football. And you look at everything they did, and I think their biggest weaknesses, honestly, were, elite coaching related. Like that porous opponent red zone touchdown percentage that was 127th. You don't get that you don't get that result with Oregon's talent without some type of coaching deficit. It's the same thing with the third down conversion percentage with those DBs and linebackers and D linemen they had. Like Lupoy, he fielded Lanning's best defense in 2025 that Lanning's ever had with the Ducks, but they had weaknesses last year. And I still don't think last season that he was one of the top defensive coordinators in all of college football. I thought he may have turned a corner after that Penn State game. Then we saw who Penn State actually was, and they weren't nearly as good as I or most people even thought they were when they went 6-6, and Kotelnicki's offense really disappointed. I think there is a lot of room for growth with this defense compared to where they were last season. And keep in mind, last season, their defense was unanimously top 10. Some even rated them top 5 in defense. The offense was there as well. This is a team that last fall was a national title contender. They just happened to run into Indiana again, and they had a bad matchup with what Indiana wanted to do versus what Oregon wanted to do. And the strengths of Indiana, the weaknesses of the Hoosiers versus the strengths and weaknesses of the Ducks, running into a better coaching staff than what Oregon had. And I think Indiana, with some of the player age, Indiana scouting well, Indiana developing well, it resulted in a matchup where in that Peach Bowl, Oregon could have played the game much closer than they did. The turnover margin would indicate that. But they just ran into a team that was going to win it all that year, that went 16-0. And Oregon can be that team this year, especially if the defense takes the step forward, that I think they will. They were so good last year, and I keep seeing them outside the top 5 in preseason polls. That makes absolutely no sense with where they finished last year in power ratings and efficiency, in FEI, in PFF, S&P+. Out of the teams that weren't Indiana and Ohio State last year, like Miami, Notre Dame, Oregon, Texas Tech, those type of teams, Texas A&M, like the rest of the playoff field outside of those two, Oregon was that third best team. They were. And the consensus across metrics is that they were. So they will be the best of that group, or should be the best of that group again this season. The defense will play a humongous part in that. The offense will too, but this is about the defense. Who do you think is going to break out for Oregon's defense? That's what I'm curious about. So let me know down in the comment section below. All right, that was the exact length I wanted. The exact length I wanted for That's the exact length I wanted for that segment. Now we can talk about USC's defense with Gary Patterson turning this Trojan defense around. I've changed my mind on Gary Patterson a bit, and in a stream this week, I'm going to tell you why I changed my mind on Gary Patterson, but I think what's more important than Gary Patterson this season could actually be the players that are on the field, because they're talented, but I also think that USC doesn't quite have the player that they want defensively. They're not quite there roster-wise yet. Which players help Gary Patterson turn this USC defense around in year one of his system? Tell me down below, because I'm going to list off some names that I think are going to be breakout contributors this season for the Trojans. We have Luke Wafel up first at defensive end. He has been gaining buzz in spring camp. He's done a phenomenal job in workouts. 6'6", towering over 250 pounds. He's tall, he's long. The Ohio State legend Larry Johnson wanted him as a part of his defensive line. USC gets him. That class was phenomenal. Number 1 edge per Rivals, number 2 edge per 24/7 Sports, number 1 player in New Jersey, top 10 player nationally. Now, I believe USC has a nice defensive end room. I do not think they have a player in that D-end room right now with the upside of Luke Wafel, though. So you are going to see him, especially as the year progresses and he learns more about the system. He learns how to translate his talents to dominate or play at least at a competent level on the college football field, evolving from a great high school player to a great college player. And that's going to help him rise up the depth chart as the season progresses. We have Zariah Fisher as another breakout player for this USC defense. Why do I have Zariah Fisher on here? He was at Penn State. He was an older player. He didn't do that much. Well, that is where just plain ESPN box score watching can get you in trouble. Yes, he only had 2 sacks. He had 30 pressures. And that was on a team that pretty much quit at the end of the year, faced one of the tougher schedules in America. The Penn State's defense, the Ohio State game and Indiana game last year were the epitome of this. They did as good of a job as almost anyone, the Oregon game too, at getting pressure. They could never get home. Their pursuit wasn't that good. So again, to point to what I was saying about Wafel doesn't have the production of many players in his room. He probably has a lower floor because he's a true freshman. The ceiling he has is pretty high. Fisher is a low ceiling but high floor player that will give you production and in a superior system with a more motivated team and honestly more NFL-like bodies on the D-line than what Penn State had last year. I think that he will be a impact transfer for them, whether it's as a rotational player or whether he is in there as a starter. Looks like he's going to be a backup right now, but you need depth on the defensive line. He was an underrated get for them out of the portal. Jakeem Stewart, he was special out of high school. Sophomore now after a freshman last year where he had an interception, 1.5 sacks, 8 pressures, and a PFF grade in the 60s. I'm expecting him to have a breakout season. I know we already had some breakout moments last year, but he is going to be a high-level all Big Ten caliber player. One of the better defensive tackles in the Big Ten this season. The appropriate measurables, the speed, the awareness to even make the interception. That's a great player. And I think that when you look at what USC's done recruiting on the lines of scrimmage and how they have tried to fix defense, and I think they keep getting better at defensive coordinator, I wonder what a mind like Gary Patterson can do with a player like Jakeem Stewart. And Jakeem Stewart's not the end of it either. Linebacker was a huge weakness for USC last year. Elijah Newby who played some as a redshirt freshman last year, 8 total tackles, 6 tackles, 67.5 PFF grade. With Eric Gentry leaving the program, ran out of eligibility, played honestly pretty poorly last year. And in 2024, he redshirted because he just kept getting hurt. So a sad end to his career, I would say. In his absence, someone's going to have to step up at linebacker. I would expect Elijah Newby to be that player. 6'3", 235 pounds. USC now has the players with the appropriate measurables to be a elite team. That's why Riley has said this is the championship window. The question is, who steps up, who actually fulfills that? And we have yet to see a USC team that really develops or coaches or does all of these things at an elite level. I think on defense, you're going to see progress, which we saw at USC under Lynn, and now you're going to see more of it under Patterson. The cornerback room for USC, I would say, is intriguing this year. They didn't use the portal much, but they did bring in Jontez Williams from Iowa State. He was hurt last year, but still an interception, 2 pass breakups. He's 5'10", 185, I believe, but he hits hard, great tackler, fantastic player, and he'll be joining a more talented unit. Also will be playing, much tougher competition than Iowa State did. USC's corners last year, USC's defense really overall, outside of parts of the defensive line and at times parts of the secondary, were pretty atrocious. So I would say bringing in him, a proven redshirt senior, an older player, plays well, will play on Sundays in the future. That's a great get. And then Alex Graham redshirted last year, played in 4 games, but he looked pretty good in those 4 games. 15 total tackles, PFF grade in the 60s. Marcellus Williams comes back, so having him, Graham, and Williams, Jontez Williams, in the same room, that's pretty important right there. USC is a quietly deep cornerback room this season. I would like to see some players break out at safety, and while I am projecting a lot of players to break out on the defensive line, I would like to see the players in the D-line that already have proven production, like Cameron Crawford, Braylon Shelby, those type of athletes, take steps forward. If not maybe big steps forward, because I think that USC has upgraded defensive coordinator. At the very worst, I think they've pushed there, and they have all the talent in the world there. So that room collectively needs to take a step forward. And last season, that was one of the brighter spots on the team, was they got a 7.3% sack percentage. Like, they were able to get some pressure. And I do think their defensive line this year is going to be good. And by good, I mean great. I mean a unit that will contend to be top 15 or top 10 in the sport. I have some concerns about linebacker. I have some concerns about safety. Special teams I'm concerned about too. USC has been porous at times there in the Lincoln Riley era. This is a defense, though, that I have a hard time seeing not go up when you look at the numbers that they produced. I mean, they were horrible at stopping the run. They were pretty pathetic at getting off the field, at stopping opponents from scoring touchdowns in the red zone. They gave up over 20 points per game, which, look against this coming year's schedule, that might be acceptable if it's the low 20s with the roster they have and the schedule they have. But this is USC, and Lynn was very impressive in his first year. His second year, I just think he was still good, not quite as impressive. I think it will be a mutual benefit to both parties for Lynn to go to Penn State and for Gary Patterson to be the defensive coordinator for the Trojans. I like them to improve, particularly in stopping the run, but also being more disciplined in stopping the pass too. Really just in a lot of general ways, I do expect improvement. The offense is already where it needs to be. It's just the defense, with stopping the run being, I think, the most important point of emphasis this preseason. Because out of the big 3 teams they play, Ohio State, Oregon, and Indiana, all of those teams will probably be better at running the ball than they were last year, and most of them will be better at running the ball than throwing the football. So in order to beat one of those teams, or say beat Wisconsin on the road, or beat Penn State on the road, or even beat a Washington team at home who had a pretty good run defense last year and brings back a lot of their O-line and a mobile QB, so they should run the football well too, the Trojans are going to need to do a much better job at stopping the run. If they do that with the offense they have, with the ratings they had last year, the returning starters in production from that top 15 team that the Trojans have, then USC is going to be a pretty damn good team this year. They're going to make a run at the college football playoff, and if they don't make it, they're going to be on the outside looking in. If they do, they could be a threat to win the national title. Last but certainly not least, we got breakout players on Texas Tech's offense. This is the last video for our breakout players series in terms of just looking at certain teams and just talking about their entire side of the football. We might come back to this at some point in the summer, so stay tuned for that. We're going to come up with new themes every week. There are some pretty cool themes, not necessarily for this week, although this week the theme is predictions. There will be conference record predictions that release this week. Our top 25 is going to release. There's going to be a lot of longer videos released this week. But yeah, breakout players for Texas Tech. Texas Tech lost Brendan Sorsby. Currently, he's fighting to regain eligibility, but we're going to assume that he's going to be out, at least for now. Assuming that Brendan Sorsby does not regain... Assuming Brendan Sorsby is not eligible for 2026, who are some breakout players, transfers, or players on last year's roster who will step up for the Red Raiders in 2026? Will this unit take a step forward despite Sorsby's absence? I think I've made pretty clear in previous videos that my answer is yes. And I think yours should be too, and hopefully this video can explain why. So my first breakout player on this Texas Tech offense, let me know who yours is down below, is Will Hammond. If Hammond is healthy, he showed flashes of talent last year that I don't think Morton had, particularly with using his legs. 7 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, a QBR in the 70s, 680 passing yards. And you're talking about a quarterback that had a high PFF grade, completed above 60% of his throws as a redshirt freshman. Then he suffered an ACL injury. And those suck, but those are not the death sentences that they were 10 years ago. Jake Butt, he goes down in the Orange Bowl against Florida State, sadly, and that really messed up his career in the NFL. All-American level tight end. If that happened today, just based on most history that I've seen recently with ACLs, it's much easier to recover from that now, thankfully. So I would expect Hammond, if he is healthy in week 1, or whenever he comes back and is healthy, to look at least as good as he did last year. I don't think his career is going to be messed up from that injury. But will he take a step forward is another question. And I would answer yes, because it's the second year of Mac Leftwich's system, and his supporting cast has improved. One underrated player in the supporting cast is Quentin Joyner at running back. Joyner had 3 touchdowns, 7.6 yards per carry, and 478 rushing yards at USC in 2024, with an 80.5 PFF grade. He is fast, speedy, nimble. He was going to be Texas Tech's running back 1 last year. Then he got hurt, and Cameron Dickey and Jacoby Williams were good anyway. Now that he's healthy and has another year in that system, because, yes, he was hurt, but he's going to be learning the playbook. He's going to be more integrated with the team. I can't wait to see what he does on the field, because I think he's such a good player when healthy that you can't really keep him off. I'm always high on teams in the Big 12 or ACC that get Big 10 or SEC backups to play for them, especially if their program has a good developmental system, and Texas Tech does. So How many rushing yards will Quentin Joyner have this year? Don't quite know. I would guess a few hundred. I would not be shocked, even though Texas Tech has both of their starting running backs returning. It wouldn't shock me if maybe he was pushing one of them to leapfrog over, because he's just that good of a player. Micah Hudson for them's been big this spring. He has been their number one wide receiver in spring camp. He only had 2 touchdowns and 112 receiving yards last year, and tried to transfer to A&M. Texas Tech got him back. I now can see why they really wanted him back, even though he initially left the program. 5-star out of high school. He's had his breakout season. If they're correct that he's looked this good and broken out, and the defense is just nearly as good as it was last year, not even as good, he's due for a huge year in the Big 12. The Big 12 is a conference that I think is stronger than the ACC, sure. It's still not as strong as the SEC or Big 10, where having the caliber of athletes that Texas Tech doesn't have the same guarantee of success as it would in the Big 12, where there's just a much larger talent deficit. And on top of that, I think A&M has good coaching, great development, and scouting. So I'm projecting that Hudson's going to have a big season. Kenny Johnson at Pitt, man, oh man, he's projected to be a wide receiver 1 for them, and he had 700 receiving yards last year at Pitt, 695 to be specific, 5 touchdowns, 48 receptions. What I'm seeing out of Texas Tech's wide receiver room is that it's the best in the Big 12, and it's actually one of the deepest in America if their transfer additions pan out. They also added Malcolm Simmons from Auburn, who had 457 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. That was with Jackson Arnold throwing the football. And he couldn't be wide receiver 1 there because, well, Cam Coleman was there as wide receiver 1, and is going to be the second best receiver in all of college football this year, behind Jeremiah Smith. So Simmons, will he break out this season? Will he play? Haven't heard much about him, but I'm going to say yes, that he's going to have a good year. The talent is just there. As long as he buys in, he is probably the most talented receiver outside of, like, maybe Micah Hudson on that roster. Dante Lee Jr. transferred in from Liberty. He can play. 6'3", 5 touchdowns, 18.4 yards per reception, is a deep threat for this team. Underutilized at Liberty. Liberty was a pretty bad team last year. Never thought I would say that with Jamie Chadwell coaching anywhere, but stranger things have happened. Dante Lee is projected to be a second stringer right now, and the fact that he's projected to be a second stringer, that Malcolm Simmons is actually projected to be a second stringer, that shows you how deep this wide receiver room is. At tight end, they're going to be deep too. They return Terrence Carter Jr., who could be tight end 1. I think only Jamari Johnson is a better tight end than Carter right now. Jet Carpenter, though, is one of the best backup tight ends in all of college football. 374 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns, 35 receptions, 69.7 PFF grade. He's a 7th-year senior, so you have a lot of experience. You got a man close to his prime, closer than almost anyone else in college physically. He's big. He's a great blocker. A lot of proven production. I loved that addition. And then I also loved the addition of Jordan Church from Louisville. 1,265 career snaps, 65 PFF grade in 2025, 12 pressures and a sack allowed, had a pretty bad pass blocking grade of 50, pretty passable run blocking grade, though, at 69.1. And I think with him transferring in, with Sheridan Wilson returning at center, with Jacob Ponton and Howard Sampson returning at tackle, and Hunter Zambrano is projected to start after being hurt early in the season last year at the other guard spot, you're looking at an O-line that I think is deeper, bigger, faster, stronger, more cohesive than last year's unit was. And I'm excited to see where it's going to land this fall. But having a stronger O-line, stronger running back room, stronger tight end group, likely stronger receiver room as, Coy Eakin comes back along with those transfers, and Micah Hudson returns, and it sounds like he's possibly going to break out. You're looking at an upgraded supporting cast for a quarterback who isn't as experienced as Morton, but is more talented. And that should help with, some of these things like pass protection, where Texas Tech struggled in, with turnovers per game, where Morton was inconsistent there. Their yards per carry and yards per pass were pretty mediocre, and the only reason Texas Tech was towards the top in, say, points per play, yards per point, punts per score, third down conversion percentage, had a lot to do with their receivers. It also had a lot to do with their defense. Their defense would force all these turnovers, and many times they'd be in opponent territory, and that would give this team short fields to score on. They also just had a copious talent edge in every game they played, even against Arizona State when Leavitt, Tyson, and Raleek Brown were healthy. Texas Tech still had the more talented team. They just lost. The only game where they had inferior talent was against Oregon, where they lost 23-0. And in order for that not to be the case, for them to beat a team of that caliber, despite having less talent, they need an upgraded passer. I think they have that. They needed upgrades on the O-line. I think they have that. And receiver and tight end is there too. And their running back room is one of the best in college football. The rushing grade, I just have it an A- because I don't quite know what to think of the O-line. They were at times good in like shotgun situations, but in situations where I felt like it was obvious they were running or wanted to run, BYU and Oregon had a pretty easy time, I think, snuffing out their rushing attack. So I do need to see some progress there. But it was an offense that, with third down conversions, with some explosive plays, was effective last year. And I think a second year in Mac Leftwich's system will help. The defense, we talked about this in an earlier video, but people don't discuss the defense enough. I might have to make a video comparing the top three defenses last year: Indiana, Ohio State, and Texas Tech. Texas Tech was first in EPA per play, first in efficiency, first in FEI defense, third in S&P Plus defense, third in EPA per rush allowed, and fourth in EPA per pass allowed. That was a historic unit. They allowed only 0.002. They allowed 2 thousandths fewer or more points per play than Ohio State did. Like, barely any more. And they got after the quarterback more. They turned over opponents more. I think their game against Oregon was as impressive as Ohio State's against Indiana, and I thought that was Ohio State's most impressive defensive performance that I've seen in the 2020s. This defense is not talked about enough for how crazy it was that they assembled that. And again, this is about the offense, but if they can just be 90% or 80% even of what they were on defense, and the offense takes a decent step forward, this team will be similar or better than last year, and they will certainly have a higher chance of winning it all because they won't be as one-dimensional. And that defense was so good that the offensive issues were completely masked in advanced analytics. Like, they finished in FPI with the 35th best offense. They finished in other metrics with a pretty poor, outside the top 25 offense. And yet the defense was so good and their wins were so dominant that a lot of that went ignored until that Oregon game happened. And then a lot of analysts thought, or even said, oh, crap, yeah, this team was incomplete. I believe strongly that the Red Raiders will field a more complete team this year. Let me know if you do. My reasoning is that this offense has better players than it did last year. Their scouting is great. They have continuity on offense. They have continuity in the defensive backfield, too. The questions are, do the amount of transfers at wide receiver and D-line that they brought in pan out? And knowing their scouting, I would say the answer to that's most likely, yeah, most of them do. Okay, wow. We're through a lot of this, which is fantastic, I would say. Now we can get on to some other topics to discuss. Nebraska and 2026 being Matt Rule's most critical season at Nebraska, and 2026 being Nebraska's most critical season in the 2020s, is here. So Josh Pate usually has like paper pop stats. I don't know how often he does that now, but he would do that in the regular season. I think he still does it, but it's more of a regular season thing. So this is a paper pot stat, and it is pretty brutal. Matt Rule is 2-10 in the month of November. I think, right? Yeah, 1-3 last year. Me saying I think kind of took the juice out of that, but still. Sometimes teams do play like 5 games in November, especially with the double byes in this previous calendar. Nebraska got two byes, though, in November, 1 each per season, and then in 2023 we only had 1 bye. So yeah, Matt Rule is 2-10 in the month of November, and this is the most brutal schedule I think Nebraska has had since 2021, where they had a pretty good team, but they went 3-9, and I think the losses slowly ate into the culture, got into the head of the team, and that led to the collapse in 2022. I believe Nebraska's 2026 season is the most critical season in Nebraska's program history in the Big Ten. I think it is their most critical season under Matt Rule, and certainly of the 2020s. And here's why. Why am I saying that? When, Bo Pelini, now thinking about that may have been a stretch. But is it? Is it a stretch? I don't know. I don't know if that's a stretch. I don't know if that's a stretch, really. I mean, when you think about it, the Big Ten is tougher than it used to be. It has more money than it used to have. It's more committed to football. There are more programs vying for championships in the Big Ten than ever before. And Nebraska's still middle of the road or lower third of the conference in terms of like wins. So that means they're constantly getting passed up. And if they have to cycle through and get another coach, that could be a very bad thing that could set the program even further back. The 2026 season, I think the 2026 season is Nebraska's most critical of the 2020s. It's Matt Rule's most important year of his Nebraska career. I will go a step further and ask whether or not this is Nebraska's most important season in its Big Ten history. Now, why would I ask that? Well, let's look at the stakes of this season. What is at stake? What's at stake for Nebraska is its capability to level up in the conference at a level that is reasonable, to improve and get to a point where in a few years you're now talking about competing for championships. You're not talking about the college football playoff. You're talking about yourself as a developmental program. Again, these are all possible at Nebraska, for sure. And while I have said before that I think Nebraska shouldn't expect national titles right now, they have to lower their expectations to a level that I don't think other blue bloods have to, just because of where they're at right now. Long term, they should be looking to steadily but surely improve and get to a point where they view themselves as college football playoff contenders. They view themselves as a team that can win big games, that can beat ranked opponents. Matt Rule, I think he's a great culture builder. I think that he is a great recruiter. I believe in what he's doing at Nebraska. He's 2-10 in November. Last year's team and mission sort of fell apart at the end of the year with Raiola getting injured and then transferring. And you look at the team Nebraska fielded last year, and the O-line was a mess. The front six was a mess. The defense was a mess. There was a lot of chaos. There were a lot of opportunities for breakthroughs They were good in close games, but against the one ranked team, or the two rather, that they played close, Michigan and USC, they lost those games. And this team, look, they made progress from where they've been from previous Nebraska teams, but they were negative in points per play margin, yards per point margin, barely positive in success rate margin, negative in EPA margin. So what's at stake is that was with the easiest schedule in the Big Ten, or one of the easiest in the Big Ten. Strength of schedule metrics are pretty relative, so I don't want to make a definitive statement, but it was one of the easier strength of schedules in the Big Ten last year. And now what you have is one of the toughest schedules in all of college football. You got to play Indiana. You got to play Oregon after Indiana on the road. You got to host Washington off the bye, and that's one of your easier Big Ten games. You got to play Ohio State at home, and then Iowa after that on the road. And even worse, sandwiched in between, the first three games we discussed in the final two, you have back-to-back road games against Rutgers and Illinois, who you can't consider as layup wins, even though they should be. So what is at stake here for the Cornhuskers is a 5-year program trend that really has gone up. Their recruiting class in 2025, they were young. They brought in some good players still. They even got a 5-star at cornerback, I believe, Danny Odom, the third. They got a corner, and he was a 5-star at the end of his high school career. So, they can recruit, and they've done well, but that's kind of a gamble to take there. And they did it because they were young. I think they believed in many aspects of the young roster they had last year, just thought they needed better coaching. It's why they got an underrated portal class that wasn't large, wasn't, flashy, but was good. And I think brought in key players who could help change the culture, give some juice and energy, and also players that are important for fundamental success in the Big Ten, such as Jashir Washington, Owen Stoudemire, Ben Black, the offensive lineman, defensive lineman they brought in, Owen Chambliss, Dwayne McDougall, players at the middle from Rob Orge's, defense at San Diego State. But that was a gamble there, that small recruiting class. Because if things get messy and say the 2027 class doesn't pan out, or there's an exodus, then you have a roster hole that's left from that year. And it is a upward trajectory under Rule that Frost never had, where Rule is the first Nebraska coach. It's why I gave him a B grade. It's why I gave him that high of a grade. And people pushed back on it. He's the first Nebraska coach since Bo Pelini to have 2 seasons in a row with 6 or more wins. Riley never had that. Frost never had that. And Rule's doing it in an era that I think is harder on Nebraska than the previous era is, because Nebraska's now more removed from their Texas pipeline and Southern pipelines than ever before, and Nebraska now has basically 10 years of losing and is further behind in NIL than other programs are, let's just face it. And yet they're still trending up, and that's a good thing. That's at stake, though, with this schedule. If Nebraska takes 7 losses or 8 losses, or in some cases say they even take 6 losses on this schedule, and the discontent and unhappiness and anger continues to brew in the ways that it felt like they did last season and part of this preseason, then all progress could be lost. I don't think it'll happen. Their win total 6.5. I do trust this roster to beat the teams that they should beat, maybe with the exception of one of those teams. And if they beat everyone they should beat -1, they'll get to 6 wins. And I think that's all Matt Rule needs to maintain a semblance of cabin pressure is, hey, I'm the first Nebraska coach to have 3 seasons of 500 in the regular season or better. I maintained that with the toughest schedule I've ever had in my career here. And we have an epic 2027 recruiting class. And if they can show development and progress on defense and continue to develop Calandria in the way that Mullen did, that will be good enough. However, last season, outside of special teams, look at who they were. That was the worst run defense, perhaps in all of college football last year. One of the worst. When they ran out and trotted out their players, it looked as if Nebraska were running a 1-5-5 or a 6-5 or a 5-6 defense. And by that, I know normal terminology is D-line linebackers and then the DBs are assumed, unless it's a nickel defense, at which point it's 4-2-5. When I say 5-6, I mean 0-5-6. I mean there were times where it looked like they had no defensive linemen of Big Ten caliber. They were that small up front. A program like Nebraska has no business being that small up front at times, even if they're in pass rush sets. And their pass defense wasn't even that good either. It was masked early in the year by playing Bryce Underwood, who didn't have receivers, who he himself was poorly coached, wasn't super good that year. Sorsby had chemistry issues with his receivers. You look at their games against Michigan State. That was Aiden Childs. Maryland had Malik Washington. Malik Washington was a lot like Bryce Underwood. Had a lot of drops. Was good at times. Other times could be horrific. They had a lot of benefits early on. Then when they played Penn State, they played Iowa, things really fell apart. And USC, their pass defense actually did fairly well. USC, though, on the road, how much can you count on that? They had such a good schedule last year to take advantage of, and they just failed to do it. So now they got to move on. You got to look to 2026 now. Enough of 2025. What is Nebraska in 2026? They are a good staff. They are a average program. They are a average team that all have a lot of upside. But there's a lot of pressure on them due to history. And with the schedule they have, there's a floor there. I like this coordinator duo in Dana Holgorsen and Rob Orich. Orich was a standout DC at San Diego State. Holgorsen, I know there's been criticism of him last year, but keep in mind that was really his first full year with the program. And while he doesn't usually deal with hypermobile QBs, keep in mind that with what Matt Rule wanted to do, there's probably a conflict there. Also keep in mind with who Dylan Raiola is, he took a sack on about a third of his pressures faced, which is just insanely high and bad. I think Raiola's good and underappreciated in a lot of ways, but still, that was a bad aspect of his game. I think a lot went against him. And also the offensive line. That's not his fault. That was an atrociously coached unit that should receive a huge upgrade this season with Jeep Wade as the O-line coach. Rule I give more benefit of the doubt to than a lot of his own fan base will, than a lot of people will. Rule is a program builder. Rule is a good recruiter. He's a relational guy. He's a friendly guy. And he's a motivator, and you can run through a brick wall for him, or run through a brick wall. Don't know if I said that. Point I'm saying here is that they've done a good job. It's not been great. It has certainly not been elite. There have been times where it is closer to bad than elite, such as the reality of elite. It's very rare to be elite in anything in life. But 19-19 at Nebraska through 3 seasons, when you remember what that program was beforehand, I actually think it's a good job, especially when you consider the amount of staff turnover, the amount of times that some assistants have just, like Eckler, have just left for greener and brighter pastures, when you consider that Raiola, for example, left for greener and brighter pastures. When you consider that Nebraska, it's an open secret. They're operating with less NIL than other programs are, and they're out in the middle of the plains. They have a worse recruiting pipeline than Iowa or Wisconsin or most schools in the Big Ten. So give credit where it's due here. It's a good program. They have good talent. The coaches brought in that talent. Orich is a huge upgrade at DC. Holgerson is finally going to have a full 2 years to implement his offense here, and I would expect improvements on that side of the ball. And one thing I'll give credit to Rule for is he's made mistakes, but he's trying to change them. He's not like Mel Tucker or Sharon Moore or even Lincoln Riley, who's a much better football coach than those two, but he's saddled his programs with Grinch for over half a decade. Matt Rule's not doing that. He had the church bells between his legs to institute a change mid-season at offensive coordinator in 2024 that really panned out. This schedule, as I mentioned earlier, is so brutal. And that's why this is Nebraska's most important season in quite some time. Because it's a schedule that can break a team and that can break a program. And I don't think it'll happen to Nebraska, but Ohio, Bowling Green, North Dakota, we'll probably learn a fair bit against those three. Because when it was the end for Frost and the end for Riley at Nebraska, you saw them look pretty terrible against those caliber of teams. Think Northwestern or North Dakota for Frost in 2022. Think about in 2017 with Northern Illinois and the pick six in that game and losing that game. That was bad. Michigan State on the road. If Nebraska is done, if it's over, that will be a loss. It will. Maryland at home could be too. Now, those also should be, if things are together, if my theory that, the program is in a actually fairly healthy place, then they'll start out 5-0 in those first games. Indiana at home, Oregon on the road, off a bye, Washington, it's at home, but it's not going to be easy still. And then at Illinois Friday night, at Rutgers, Ohio State at home, at Iowa. That's a tough end to the schedule there. Nebraska really needs to start out 5-0. 4-0 in September, get that first one in October, and weather the storm against Indiana, Oregon, Washington, Ohio State, Iowa. And a good test of this program's gumption would be look at Illinois and at Rutgers. Those are back-to-back road games. Nebraska has not won back-to-back road games since the early 2000s, since almost the year I was born, and I'm 23. Win those back-to-back games. Those are easy opponents. None of them have the rosters that you do. Rutgers does not. Illinois does not. You have a better quarterback than those teams. You have a better offensive line. You have better linebackers and safeties than those teams do. You have a better wide receiver group than those. And Illinois is good at receiver, and Rutgers probably is a first-rounder in KJ Duff. Win those back-to-back games. This is Nebraska's most critical season of the 2020s and most critical of its era in the Big Ten, because if the Matt Rule project fails and things get bad with this schedule, that's going to be 3 coaches who failed to do it. 3 hires who will be considered failures. And all the meanwhile that's going on, Indiana is up as a top program, Oregon is, Ohio State is, Iowa, for now, is a better program than Nebraska. Michigan and USC look to resurge. Washington home on October 31st, that's going to be a game of an old blue blood in Nebraska and a team in the Big Ten who's trending up in recruiting and wins. That's a program game there. Illinois on the road is a program game. Illinois had more success under Bielema than Nebraska has under Rule. Some of these games on the schedule are must-wins, if not for anything else than symbolism, rather than actual win-loss record. So Nebraska, in order to stop their fall down the totem pole in the hierarchy, which that stuff will repel donors, that will cause mediocrity to entrench itself even further, and that will, continuous resets over and over and over again can break programs down. And Nebraska doesn't need that. So the fan base needs to be involved and behind this team. The coaching staff, they're locked in. They need things to work out, evaluations to hit, development needs to take place. They need some wins that previous Nebraska teams in the past decade just couldn't earn. Road games, tough games, close games. The fan base and the team and the recruits, too, probably need a blowout win against one of those Big Ten teams, too, where just from start to finish, you see a complete, proven product on the field. Maybe being too dramatic. Let me know down below in the comments section, but I think this is an important season for the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Okay, we got a super chat in here. So let's get to that super chat. Went a little bit long on that segment, I do believe, which I do not like. Don't like that when I go that long. But we should only have an hour left of this show. So let me pop out this chat really quickly and get to these super chats. Damn, we have 30 concurrent viewers in here. That was even with all my mistakes earlier. You guys are incredible. This will be one day. This will be the best college football community if it isn't already. It's very undervalued. Going for Gold 85636 says, and thank you for the $5 super chat, Going for Gold. My biggest concern with Nebraska is we only have a few years left to reinforce our donors. If we don't get it together soon, our donor class is going to die. And then he follows it up with a $2 super chat saying, sounds harsh, but is true. It is true. I don't know how this isn't irrefutable. Donor class, I mean, look at Indiana. Indiana never invested in football, even with all that wealth. They just thought it was a foregone conclusion that they would suck forever. And then Cignetti comes in and makes changes, and now they're involved. They're deeply involved. Look at LSU. LSU was nothing before Saban got there. Really. Maybe not nothing. I don't know enough about LSU history. But they were not what they are in the 21st century. And Saban got in. They started winning. Their donors, their, everything there got involved to help them. Look at Miami with Jimmy Johnson. Oklahoma with Barry. I mean, there were successful OU coaches before Barry Switzer, but Jimmy Johnson pretty much made Miami from the ground up. The inverse is true as well, where if you continue to lose, even if you are a formerly proud program, things will die. And I don't want that to happen. Nebraska being good, these traditional programs being good, is good for college football. As long as teams are able to challenge them, and it's not only them ruling the sport. Like it was in the 2010s, where like Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, later in the 2010s, like they controlled everything. That was not fantastic. But it's also not fantastic when a lot of these top-end programs are just disappointing either. And for Nebraska, look, long-term, I think if I were to say right now, 5 years from now, is Rule going to be the head coach or not, I would probably say yes. I think internally they know, too, what their expectations are, what reality is. And I think as long as they go bowling and have some years where they break out, Rule's going to be there. Like, they cannot fire him. It would be asinine for them to fire him with 7 wins or 8 wins. At some point, you got to break through and get like 9, or for Nebraska, that would be 8. At some point, you have to get there. But they're kind of going through a program reset right now. Like with the small recruiting class they brought in, they're going all in for 2027 with this schedule, breaking from Raiola, who they thought would be there for 3 or maybe even 4 years. They're going through a reset right there. So, yeah. It sounds harsh. I do think it is a reality, though. Like, they need to win. And this fall, I don't think winning means, you win 10 games or 9 games, like a lot of people, myself included, foolishly predicted last year. I think this year just means, win all the games you should. And all the games Nebraska should win is probably 7 to 8 games right there, where they'll be favored in 7 of them. And then Washington or Iowa, they'll be enough of an underdog to where they could expect, at least compete in both of them, if not pull out an outright upset in one of those games. For Iowa or Washington in particular, too, because those are rival programs. Like IU, Oregon, and Ohio State are way up here. Like you're not gonna catch them in 1 year. Washington and Iowa right now are above you. Washington probably only passed you last season as a Big Ten program. Iowa has been there, but we know that with Ferentz, they also have limited mobility. Beating one of those teams would be a program and symbolic victory, and not just like a memory, but it would, I think, would reinvigorate a feeling of pride in the program. Maybe I'm overthinking it. I hope not. I don't like when I overthink things. But thank you for the super chats. I appreciate them. If anyone else has anything they want to say, send it a super chat. Just because I want to get out of here, because I want to get videos up, want to get shorts out. Haven't done the best job at doing that. We're just going to blaze through unless there's any more super chats here. Time for a coaching grade on Kirby Smart. How well has Kirby Smart done as the head coach at Georgia? What grade would you give Kirby Smart as Georgia's head coach? Let me know down below. I think you can approach this from a variety of angles because he has been at Georgia for so long. Kirby Smart will be entering his 11th season with the Bulldogs. It's been that long. For some of you, fans much older than I, college football fanatics older than I, you probably remember the day that Kirby Smart got hired at Georgia, and it feels like yesterday. Now we're 11 years into this thing. He's 117-21, so he wins about 85% of his games. His past 2 seasons have been viewed by some as failures, and yet they've ended in, yes, playoff losses, but before that, SEC championships and a 25-5 record. So right there, he's winning 5 out of every 6 of his games over the past 2 seasons with, tough schedules, with some injuries at times. Other times, he's had a talent advantage and lost. And I understand that there's a lot of opinions here. And I say that because, for example, I love Kirby Smart. But I also understand the expectations at Georgia. And I understand that, look, in comparison to like Ryan Day, he's been at Georgia for longer than Day has. 3 years longer. Day right now is at the peak of his tenure. Kirby, I think his peak was from 2021 to 2023. And we'll see if he can retain that, but that will be a very, very hard thing to do. At Georgia, he is 2-7 against Alabama. He is 2-11 versus the top 10, which is nuts. He's a 4-time SEC champion. He is 5-3 in the college football playoff. 0-2 in the 12-team era, though. I don't know how you could give Kirby Smart anything less than an A, and I'm actually still going to give him an A+, believe it or not. So how am I going to justify this? Because I know that as a Big Ten channel, and also from where college football's turned, where the consensus in coaching grades right now is that Ryan Day and Curt Cignetti are better than Kirby Smart. And there are some people who probably think like Marcus Freeman is better than Kirby Smart. After all, he's 1-0 against him. Some might even think Lanning has surpassed Kirby Smart, or there are other coaches that have. Think about the NFL talent on Georgia's roster these past 2 seasons. And I understand there's also, people talk about this all the time on Twitter. Someone's mentioning it in my live chats right now. I'm going to bring it up. The arrests, the car driving, the culture issues there. Here's what I'm going to say. I compartmentalize the culture issues because the driving stuff is bad. It needs to be controlled. And yeah, there's no really excusing that. Right now, I just want to look at the football on the field. The wins, losses, the coaching. We do not excuse scummy behavior here on college football with Sam, and it's pretty bad. that they've had those issues. However, I do not know how involved Kirby Smart is, and I think we will get a better picture of the state of Georgia's culture after he's retired and we get to see the full professional and college careers of pretty much all of his players. So it's an incomplete picture right now, though there are some indictments there. He has had far less NFL talent than, say, Ryan Day has. Now, he's recruited at the same level, so that could be an indictment of his development. I'm willing to buy that. He's also played, in 2024, the toughest schedule in college football. Last year was a pretty tough schedule, too. And sometimes you just have bad evals at the wrong time. So Ohio State and Georgia recruited similarly from 2020 to 2023, and on average in those years, Georgia was the much better team. So stuff can also just fluctuate like that. Last season, Ryan Day and Kirby Smart both went 12-2. Now, whose 12-2 was more impressive? The team with a strength of schedule in the regular season that was outside the top 40, or the team whose strength of schedule in the regular season was more inside the top 25? You expand it then to the postseason, and who was more impressive? The team with a record-setting amount of first-rounders inside the top 11, and who only played 3 FPI top 15 teams all season long, or the team that played, let me see, Alabama twice, Ole Miss twice, Texas once, played 5 of them. And I might be missing another one off the top of my head, but I think it is just 5. And he had a 3-2 record against those teams. Who's more impressive over last year? I think that would be Georgia, given the talent difference from an NFL standpoint on those two teams. Both were 0-1 in the 12-team playoff. Both lost to teams that played a very competitive game in the Fiesta Bowl, so we have, a marker of comparison between them. And I gave Ryan Day an A+ and said that he's one of the best in the business. He's undervalued by many within and outside of his own fan base. And the only criticisms you can give of him that are on field are pretty much nitpicking. And I would say that's the same thing with Kirby Smart as well. Now, the off-field things, I think Day has done a much better job at that. I've not heard of Ohio State, speeding. I've not heard of anyone on Ohio State's roster, constantly getting into trouble. Ohio State has a high graduation percentage. I think they do a better job off the field. And even I would say on field culturally, they usually bring back more NFL-ready players to have success in college. And with Georgia and a lot of these SEC teams, it feels like the second they can go to the pros, they pretty much do. But that could also be an NIL thing, where I know for a fact Ohio State spends more than Georgia because their donor base is larger. With Georgia, even with NIL hurting them, even with the portal hurting them, in part because of NIL, in part because they've also missed occasionally with some portal classes, despite that, they've still had success, and they've still recruited at a high level. Last year, their team was young, and it was better than the team before last year that had 13 players drafted in the NFL, had multiple first-rounders, and had a ton of talent. Mike Bobo, I know I've gotten hate from this from even people I respect, even people who know more than me. I think they did a pretty good job offensively last year. The coordinator I would actually look at right now, not Bobo, would be Schumann. Schumann would be the coordinator I would look at. Because how can you be a top 5 coordinator and field a defense that was that bad at the beginning of the season? I don't even know if that's possible, to be honest. Especially when you know that Kirby Smart's involved with the defense. Kirby Smart's a defensive genius. So if he's involved in that whole thing and the defense is performing that badly, who else would you look at other than the coordinator or maybe the position coaches there? So there are some things that are imperfect. There are some cultural things that might be imperfect. But I want to compartmentalize those. And a lot of people who are punishing Kirby Smart last year, okay, why are you punishing him but not punishing Sarkisian? Or why are you punishing him but not punishing Freeman for being, look, 0-2 against top 10 teams last year, 1-2 against the FPI top 15, losing to an A&M team that at the end of the year didn't look so hot and wasn't even really all that hot at the start of the year? Why aren't you punishing Ryan Day for having more talent and yet achieving the same record with a weaker strength of schedule than Kirby Smart? Like, what are we doing here? It's the same thing as Ryan Day criticism. It's nitpicking. Now, one is likely better than the other. I'm on Team Smart there, but if you're on Team Day there, I don't blame you. I think that Smart, Day, and Cignetti are the only coaches with an argument to be number one right now. But this team last year was good, even with their issues. And they return pretty much all of that team entering this season. And that speaks to something there. I think, for example, that Ryan Day's been better with the portal on an average basis over the past few seasons than Kirby Smart has. But last season, when Ohio State had their mass portal exodus and roster turnover, and Georgia was just kind of sitting there like, okay, we're not going to use the portal that much, but we're bringing everyone back from a 12-2 team. I think that Georgia also, on another hand, culturally, has something nailed down that a lot of other programs don't, where they retain vast amounts of their roster and players. Now, part of that could also be they were super young, so they were able to promise a lot of those players playing time. I don't know. Coaches know more than me about all of these things. And when you are as successful as Nick Saban, who's in a tier of his own, and then in tiers down, when you are as successful as Kirby Smart, as Curt Cignetti, as Ryan Day, there are problems. They lose games. No one goes undefeated every year, but we're all imperfect. Everyone's human still. These are just human beings with elite human capital at their respective positions. And I think Smart is still in that tier. Georgia has finally an easy schedule by SEC standards this year. Tennessee State, Western Kentucky, at Arkansas, Oklahoma, Vanderbilt, at Alabama, Auburn, off the bye, Florida in the world's largest cocktail party, at Ole Miss, Missouri, at South Carolina, and Georgia Tech. There is no one on this schedule, except for maybe Ole Miss, who will be closer to a touchdown in odds against Georgia when betting lines are released. They'll be favored in all 12 of their games, and I think they're one of the greatest bargains if you're looking for a national champion this year. Look, they have a coaching edge, I would say, over everyone definitively, except for Indiana and Ohio State. And there's a chance that they're better than both there. I already gave you the argument for why Georgia's season last year was more impressive than Ohio State's. They have a coaching edge over everyone in the SEC. They have a coaching edge over rival Georgia Tech. They have a talent edge with how they've recruited and developed over everyone they're going to face on this schedule. They are a playoff lock. Texas can't say that. Ohio State can't say that with their schedule. Alabama can no longer say that. LSU has not been there long enough to say that. They are the only playoff lock in the SEC. And believe me, the SEC has heard about how they can't win a national title now and how they're 0-2 and how they're overrated. And I do think some of the overrated piece of that is actually true. But Georgia is this one school who I trust, much like these other schools with great staffs, to internalize things, and they can come out firing on all cylinders with added motivation on top of the great roster and staff that they have. So, to end this off with a short and sweet phrase, Kirby Smart gets an A+ from me. He does. It's just that simple. How can you give someone worse than an A+ when they've won 2 natties, when they've been a participant in the playoff every season since 2023, and the 12-team field would have participated in every season of their career except their first, when they've done all they've done? How can you not give him that good of a grade? I understand that I've been giving a lot of A+ out recently, but hear me out. We're talking about the top teams of the sport on this channel for the most part, the top teams are mostly going to get A or B grades. And being a college football head coach might be the toughest job in sports right now with the amount of chaos that there is too. So please just keep those things in mind if you haven't already. Okay. I'm going to take another break here really quickly, guys, and then we're going to finish out with recruiting news. We're going to finish out with bold predictions and just some other things. So just sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. I appreciate you guys for coming on. As always, we will be right back. And I appreciate Rudy the Boxer 101 going for gold 8536. The legendary Romero. Thank you for participating in the chat, being active. I really appreciate it. Make sure to like this stream up, guys. Let's try to get to 25 likes today. If you have anything you want to say, send in a super chat. Subscribe to the channel. I appreciate you guys, and we'll be back in 5 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for your patience. Time to talk about some recruiting here. Michigan recruiting is picking up steam. Miami's is too. And just some questions about Indiana as well and their recruiting. So with Michigan, Kyle Whittingham got off to a slow start as Michigan's coach in recruiting, but Brycen Moore did that too in the past two recruiting classes. And now in the month of May, Michigan has really picked up steam and signed, or not signed, but earned the commitments of a plethora of four-star, high-end four-star talent. Kyle Whittingham is off to a fast, hot start as Michigan's head coach and head recruiter, consequentially. As the CEO of a program, your job is to bring in top-end talent, nurture high-end talent, keep it together, and develop that high-end talent to be future professional pros, to win you games in college, and to be a great person. And Whittingham showed all those things at Utah in his own way. There were questions about how well he would recruit, though, and I think it's safe to say that these questions have been answered here. Michigan's top 5 2027 high school commits right now are Quentin Burrell, Xavier Muhammad, Jakari Lipsey, Camden Lopetai, and Ricardo Kitchen. They have one of the better classes in the Big Ten right now. It's very early. They're still in the running for some 4-star talent. I think they're flirting even with some 5-star talent here. And they earned so many of these commitments in the month of May. There was a point where Michigan was outside the top 40 earlier this month, or maybe late last month, April. And there were concerns about, oh, wow, recruiting has been slow. Usually, you want to wait until early fall, mid-fall, late summer before making judgments about a recruiting class. We all remember Saban's Alabama. They'd start slow, then really pick up. We all remember Michigan under Brycen Moore for, a more realistic comparison. They would start slow and finish strong. Ohio State's been a program that under Days usually started strong and just maintained. Last year it was a bit more up and down, but due to being more aggressive at the end, they were able to maintain what they had through switching out some commits with other teams. You look at this Michigan class, and they loved their 2025 class. They love their 2026 class internally. And now that they have a staff who can actually coach and develop, I love the outlook that Michigan has from a recruiting program. And getting a high-profile wide receiver, high-profile offensive tackle, defensive lineman, Camden Lopetai, previously committed to Illinois. I think Notre Dame wanted him from Utah. Imagine the staff has some connections to him there. They're recruiting great players in a balanced way across the board, and that's what you want. You don't want top-heavy classes in certain positions. You want a balanced class that can fulfill a team's needs and minimize weaknesses. Minimizing weaknesses in college football, especially in an era where it's so easy to have them because depth is thinner, I think oftentimes is more important than making sure you're trying to maximize a ceiling of a certain position. And this staff, how can you not like it? How can you not view it as an upgrade over last year's staff by a long shot? Even if they're technically worse at recruiting, that's not going to matter when you look at how much better they are at game planning, play calling, game management, and how they are in line with each other. They are like an ant colony, like a big like anthill. We all know of those. Or because I watch YouTube too late at night, sometimes I know of like the massive colonies of anthills that are all organized. They're like this insanely collectivist society. Some of the best staffs in college football operate that way. And they have great cultures. They understand what they want to do. The coordinators align well with each other and what they need and want to do. And I think he got that with Michigan. And you had that with Utah, and you had that with BYU, where most of this staff, before they came to Michigan, were at. So I love what they have, and I love what Michigan's had in recruiting the past 2 seasons. No, they're not a top-end elite recruiting program yet, but they showed flashes of it under Brycen Moore, even with borderline coaching insanity and, disgraceful incompetence. They have the good NIL. They have the goods there. They have the great coaching now. We'll see if it's elite. I would caution Michigan fans with expecting something wonderful in year 1. Just expect good for now after not having it for the past 2 years. And it looks like they may still have recruiting in place, which is good. Those are the markers of a top-end program, which Michigan, being a blue blood, should expect to have. So with Michigan, can they finish with that top 10 class and break in there? Maybe even push for a top 5 class. We'll have to see about that. But getting this amount of blue chip talent with this staff is something that is a great start at the very worst and could be intimidating to other programs if this staff and roster are able to immediately pan out in year 1. And then as they get their players, things just continue to get better and snowball. With Miami, I am confident that Miami will have their best class ever under Mario Cristobal. Miami continues to bolster its 2027 recruiting class by flipping a highly talented corner from Oregon, by earning a commitment from one of the best quarterbacks in all of college football out of high school. So out of all of high school football is what I meant to say, but knowing their track record with quarterbacks, he'll probably end up being one of the best in college football if he stays committed and goes through that developmental process. It is a wonderful recruiting operation at Miami under Mario Cristobal. And you look at the commits they have. Dante Wright, who they flipped from Georgia. Nick Lanier, 5-star wide receiver. Israel Abrams, that highly touted quarterback I was just telling you about. King Hall, or maybe E. King Hall, or A. King Hall. I don't exactly know how to pronounce that. Cool name, though. And then Sean Tatum on the offensive line, who's 6'4", over 300 pounds. All of these players, except for, even Israel Abrams at 6'5", 190. He'll probably put on some weight in his senior year, and coming right into college, he could have the appropriate weight and measurables. They have a freaky class, even by Miami standards. That's how good they are. And Cristobal has, I think he made it clear last year that Miami isn't just a finesse program that recruits talent, that loves to be a little bit on edge, loves to occasionally trade in discipline with hype. No, what they did is, against Indiana, for example, they traded in discipline, all right, with some of those penalties, but they traded it in for momentum-seeking plays. They traded it in for hitting the quarterback and for bullying Indiana's offensive line and pass protection. They developed at a wild level on the lines of scrimmage. They made it clear by hiring Corey Heatherman on defense that they want to win a national title, and that they can, because he fielded a top 5 defense last year. Their average rank per recruit is a 90.69 per 24/7 Sports. Per composite, it is a 92.51. Right now, your top 5 in average rank per recruit are Texas A&M, Texas Tech, LSU, USC, Ohio State. Miami is right there behind the Ohio State Buckeyes, and because they have an additional recruit as a part of their class, they have a better class than Ohio State right now, and a better class than Oregon, higher quality class than Oklahoma and Florida, who are ahead of them per 24/7 Sports. The rankings I'm using up here are per Rivals, just in case there is any confusion, and according to Rivals right now, Miami, just doing some live research here, the Miami Hurricanes have, I believe it is a 6th ranked recruiting class, just like in 24/7 Sports. So you didn't even need to know the Rivals rankings. Maybe I shouldn't have looked that up. But I'm confident this will be Cristobal's highest quality class ever at Miami. They do an excellent job at developing and scouting They know who they want. It's why they've been able to use the portal so much and then combine that with high school recruiting and just build up and build up and build up every season, because they know the type of player they want. They know the type of program they want to construct. They have constructed it, and it nearly culminated in them winning it all last year. Cristobal is a bit of an underrated coach. I think people before last year kind of viewed him as an idiot who could just recruit and develop well. He's not an idiot. There are weaknesses in game management, I believe, but I believe Ohio State is one of the best staffs in all of college football. It was true last year, and let me tell you, Cristobal, Dawson, and Heatherman had a far superior game plan than Patricia, Hartline, and Day did. Like, far better. What Miami's defense decided to do against Ohio State's offense to start the game was better than what Ohio State's defense planned to do to Miami's offense. Like, it was just, even that side of the ball, when, like, Ohio State is an NFL DC who won Super Bowls, and Heatherman had the better game plan. And then offensively, it just wasn't even close. Trying to take deep shots, trying to go up tempo, when you do not have the athleticism on the offensive line to beat that D-line who's far more athletic, who's bigger, stronger, faster. Whereas Shannon Dawson, knew they couldn't do anything explosive against that defense. They didn't allow big plays. So let's take what they give us. Let's lean on our strength, and let's mix in some, like that kind of weird RPO that they had inside of the 10, I believe, or a weird play action pass that they had, and where it looked like it was going to be a handoff. Or no, it looked like it was going to be a zone read, or I think a QB run, and they just throw it, and they get into the end zone and get up early. That game plan shows what this staff is capable of. They have one of the best staffs in all of college football. They have an elite defensive coordinator. They have an elite recruiter. Dawson is one of the best play callers in the game. And they bring all of that back this season. Whether or not they're going to win it all this season or be better than last season, well, that's left up for debate. I think that losing those 3 first-round picks at those positions, especially with how much Cristobal prioritizes lines of scrimmage play in his program identity, perhaps more than anyone else, I think that'll be hard to replace. But I think there's no doubt that in the long run, with these top 10 classes and what could be a top 5 class this year, stacked on top of previously high recruiting classes, you could be looking at a season where Miami is not just viewed as, oh, they're doing this because of their development. They're doing this because of their development and scouting, but also because this recruiting class may be the best in the nation, and it panned out in them winning it all. Sometimes you do need that additional good, the extra icing on the cake to make the best product. And I think that with where they're heading as a program, this recruiting class could be that for the Miami Hurricanes. So pay close attention to this class. Special QB recruit, special wide receiver, very special corners, and they've had a deep corner room this past season. Should improve this year. The year before that, they were pretty inconsistent, if not downright atrocious. So they've seen weaknesses, and they're addressing them. Interested to see how they recruit at linebacker, given the struggles they've had there. But they recruit everywhere, and with what Cristobal's done with this staff, if something isn't working out, they're going to make a change until it works out. And we have Indiana at last. The Hoosiers are contending for multiple top prospects. They have not landed any of them yet, but Jalen Brewster, Monsoon Sales, they're contending for. They received an unfortunate decommitment from a top 200 corner out of Ohio, and they also, over the weekend, received good news in a 6'7", 4-star offensive tackle who joined their recruiting class. So, with Indiana, are they gaining momentum in recruiting? It feels like right now they're not blowing it out of the water, but they're also in a similar position to where they were last year, where they ended up signing a pretty good recruiting class by Indiana standards. I think there are some things that can get lost in what this staff is, who they are, and their process here. So Mason McDermott is that 6'7", 290-pound offensive tackle. That is good height and size for a player in, coming off his junior year in high school, entering his senior year. That was a good get for them. And then Garyon Hobbs, Jamison Purcell, Brennan Sharp, and Jeremiah Jones are other players to pay attention to. Shout out to Bob Bostad for this current offensive line class. They have players in the offensive line this year that are fantastic, I think especially on the interior, but I think that they could use some personnel upgrades there as well, as with most of the positions on their roster. And I think even with a class that right now, again, isn't blowing it out of the water, you're seeing that immediately on the offensive line. If they can just land one of those top prospects they're flirting with, I mean, yeah, you could get to a point where some of these teams, as we've talked about, even after 16-0, can be scarier or even better from a talent perspective for sure, or even an overall perspective, than that historic team was. What I was saying earlier about possibly misunderstanding this staff is that the culture they have is hyper collectivist. It's the most collectivist culture in all of college football. That entire team operated with a hive mind. It's why they beat Ohio State, for example, when Ohio State had their best defensive performance that I've ever seen in the 2020s. Like, Ohio State was able to mostly neutralize RPO. They were able to put Indiana in multiple obvious passing down situations. They got Indiana to miss a field goal, which is rare. They got Mendoza to throw an interception by an awesome read from Igbinosun, and IU still wins. Why? Well, Ohio State missed a QB sneak. They missed a field goal. Yes. However, a large portion of it was that defense was just so sticky that Ohio State in the fourth quarter had to pull out a trick play to extend their drive. Like a play that Ohio State doesn't run trick plays under Ryan Day. And they were so desperate to get something on this defense after Indiana kind of did a better job preventing the deep shots that they had earlier in the game, that they had to pull out a trick play. That's insane. And against Alabama, for example, okay, Ty Simpson takes off and runs. Well, D'Angelo Pons lowers the helmet, hits him, and he fumbles, and then that leads to Indiana being up 17-0 at the half. And Alabama was never winning that game. Alabama gets snowballed. Oregon got snowballed. Some of their mistakes were self-inflicted. Others were completely forced by Indiana. And then against Miami, the blocked punt, right place, right time, that was probably IU's least sound performance defensively of the postseason, and they still won due to things they did in offense and things they did on defense. They operated with a hive mind mentality where sometimes Surratt would get it often, other times it would be Cooper, other times it would be Becker, sometimes Nowakowski. They asked their players to do pretty much anything they could do to win. And not every recruit's always like that. Sometimes recruits want to be the personality, the life of the party. Also, as much as people mention Mark Cuban with Indiana, I don't think Indiana's NIL is at the top of the Big Ten still. I would expect Ohio State, Michigan, and especially Oregon and USC to be spending more. Just based on the fact that those schools have been more involved in football more recently. Some of them even have a wealthier donor base than Indiana, even though Indiana's is pretty darn wealthy. And more importantly than that, this is only the second year of Indiana being good. So a lot of these high school players still, their worldview was already formed 4 years ago when Indiana sucked. So they still think of Indiana as, they think of them with skepticism. Because when their worldview was forming, Indiana was, let's face it, trash. So while they did just win it all, and they did just put a record amount of players in the NFL, many of them almost exclusively developed by this staff, great things take time. And in a recruiting world where people are, throwing around 7 figures to people out of high school, and people are appeasing players with, hyper dominant personalities because they think they could, maybe they won't be the best locker room player, but they could really win the team some games. And I don't know if Indiana's going to do that. We'll see. I would liken it, sometimes, there are other teams that go about it the exact opposite way, and they try to go out and get attention by getting a big-time recruit. So with Indiana, what I'm trying to say here is be patient with the team and the staff and recruiting. If they simply get a top 20 class this year, that's an improvement off of last year and possibly the best recruiting class in Indiana history. If it's top 15, it's a historic class. They don't need to go immediately from like the 30th best class to the 10th best. Just making progress year over year and getting this roster to a point where, say, 50% of it is made up of 4 or 5-star players, that would be a huge improvement over what they have right now. They won it all last year with minimizing their weaknesses and having the most balanced starting roster in all of college football. That's why they won it. Ohio State's top-end players were better than Indiana's top-end players. We may look at Oregon the same, depending on what they do with their roster this year, which mostly returned from last year. But Indiana was more balanced than both of those teams, at times by an absurd degree. And they were more disciplined than both of them. They were better coached. This is a staff that is always going to be more developmental. I just get it from watching them, from listening to them, from interacting with them. This is much more of a developmental staff and a fundamentally sound staff and a disciplined staff than it is a transactional one. And I think they're going to spend. I think they're going to keep doing what they're doing. And they're not going to change what they do to get the number one class. They're going to get there on their own way. So it's also May. That's another thing to keep in mind. I think Cignetti right now is the best head coach in the sport. Bryant Haynes and Mike Shanahan are wonderful coordinators. I'm particularly high on Haynes. I think after the past 2 years with the talent he's had, he's the best DC, college DC. And their position coaches, I think their position coaches actually should get more credit than even their coordinators do at times. Why? Because a lot of those starters and backups are 0 stars, 3 stars, or 2 stars, and they're playing with more situational awareness than like Arvell freaking Reese, who just went top 5 in the draft. So, I mean, that shouldn't be possible because Arvell Reese is a fantastic player, and yet it is possible because of this staff. So as long as there's this upward trend, or rather should do it this way, in recruiting, I think that's good enough with Indiana. They've already had an upward trend. They went from the 53rd class entering 2025 to the 30th entering 2026. If they improve by that same amount, which is like 23 spots, you're looking at a historic class this year. And if they just improve to a top 25 class, that's improvement from where they were last year. I trust this staff more than any other staff when it comes to scouting. I'm very close to saying that when it comes to development. In fact, from a short 2-year window, I would say I'd trust I'd trust them over any staff. It's just sometimes you want a longer track record than that, and I understand why people would. I would say with Indiana, they're recruiting right now, compared to where it has been previously, the fact that they're in the name, they're in the game with some of these top names, they're flirting with these top names, they've figured out, I think, how to recruit on the offensive line, it seems, from this class, and I trust them with developing 3 stars or 0 stars over everyone. So they're not lighting the world on fire in terms of commits, but they're lighting the world on fire in terms of outreach, in terms of entertaining these top guys. I think odds say, based on the success they could have this year and the success they've had the past 2 years, and the fact they have landed some underrated recruits, that there is a very good chance that they will land one of those top names this season. And I will say, I think Indiana certainly will land a top 20 recruiting class this year. Not going to say top 10. There's just so much competition there. Indiana just doesn't have the history yet or the impression upon young men yet to get many of them to view them in the same light as other top programs. But over time, if Indiana keeps winning, they'll eventually view them that way. And you'll have enough, smart players. You'll have enough spending from Indiana to where they will get some top names and continue to build that talent index. For sure. Okay, we have a super chat that I ought to get to before it disappears. It is a $5 super chat, so I very much appreciate that. It is again from Going for Gold. And yes, I have thought of this idea, so I'm just going to briefly discuss it here. Ever considered a call-in segment for the show? If no one talks, just move on to the next segment. Your fans are savvy enough to have good convos, in my opinion. I've considered it. I just need to find a way for them to call in that doesn't exactly involve my personal phone number. And I already talk a lot. I already have a lot of recording hours. So I have to figure out how to balance that with my life and like how profitable that would be. Like I think it would be worth it and I want to do it, but I'd want to figure out the logistics before getting into it, for example. Thank you for the $5 super chat though. And I think that down the road, especially by the season, there will be at least an attempt at something like this. Thank you for that. Okay. Look, we already are at a point in the show where I've been running long. We've gotten most of our content done. I know I wanted to do bold predictions, but we've already done like 11 videos, which is more than I usually do. Let me see something here. Oh no, we're good. We're good. Okay. We're gonna save bold predictions in this Bo Jackson segment for tomorrow. Tomorrow I also have a segment on Savion Hyder. So it'll be nice to pair like Bo Jackson and Hyder together. Michigan, Ohio State, both Big Ten running backs. I'm higher on both than the average person. That'll be nice. And then the bold predictions, I know it's usually a Monday thing, but it's not Monday anyway, and I've already ran this show long and already have made some mistakes that I don't like. So we will be back at you tomorrow at noon Eastern time. Thank you guys so much for watching. Stay tuned tomorrow where we'll discuss Washington making the college football playoff, Clemson's future under Dabo Swinney. We'll be discussing the Big Ten winning its 4th national title in a row. That is also a viewer bold prediction, and why Bo Jackson is the best running back in all of college football. See you guys very soon. Have a wonderful day, and God bless.